This is Ian Donaldson from H2O.
We're just outside of heaven. We're just outside of heaven.
And you're listening to the New Wave Music Podcast.
Welcome back to the New Wave Music Podcast. This is Steve.
Hey, it's T-Bone in the studio. Yeah, and Steve, I'd like also to give a little shout out to our listeners in Frederiksberg, Denmark. We really appreciate you listening to us over there.
Yes, we do. We appreciate all our listeners. And if you're enjoying the podcast, how about tipping us? You can do so at buymeacoffee.com/newwavemusic, and you can find a link for that in our episode description. But hey, T-Bone, let's go ahead and get this episode started. Our first review is going to be from the band The Church. You'll probably recognize their hits such as Reptile.
I see you slither away with a skin in your tail. You flickering tongue and you rattle and scale like a real reptile.
Metropolis.
And back in the tropics, talk about a holocaust and then visit the zoo. And back in the tropics, the weather is ridiculous. What's it all leading to?
And Under the Milky Way.
I got no time for private consultation. Under the Milky Way tonight. Wish I knew what you were looking for.
All right, so this album is called The Hypnogogue. Steve, I swear we've talked about this album for months and months and months, and finally it's here. It was a brand new release. It just came out here in 2023. Now, at my best count, this is their 18th studio album. I could
That's
be
what I had
wrong
as
on
well.
that. You have that also? It is their first album was in 1981, so they've been going for over 40 years, and their previous album was released in 2017. Now, this is their first prog concept album, but as one article I read stated, you really need to have someone tell you what the story is.
Yes.
So this one has Steve Kilbey on vocals, bass, guitar, and keyboards. He is the only original member of the band. Then you have Tim Powles on drums, percussion, and guitars. He's been around the longest other than Steve, 1994. Ian Haug on guitars, 2013. Jeffrey Kane on guitars, bass, and keyboards, 2017. And then the baby Ashley Naylor on guitars, who just started in 2020.
So before we jump into this, T-Bone, should we divulge into the little story of what the Hypnogogue is about, being their first concept?
You know, I read it and I still don't know that I get it. So yeah, please go ahead.
The description I found has the Hypnogogue traces the career of a rock star 30 years from now who falls in love with a Korean scientist who develops a device called the Hypnogogue, an apparatus that pulls thoughts from one's head and transforms them into music.
Okay.
Why do I feel like I just read an anime description?
I know, it sounds exactly what you were saying there. So let's start it off here. The first track is called Ascendance.
Struggle with our thoughts in a dream, in a room, in a song, in a paper, in an article you read in the Age.
Steve, I found this to be kind of an interesting opener. Kilby's vocals are often muted behind the strong drum beat and cascading guitars. Keyboards are also a prominent part of this track, but unfortunately, Kilby's vocals they too often blend in so much that it's difficult to, and maybe even impossible to understand what he's saying. And I felt like if this track is any indication, we're in for a very long prog experience.
Yeah, I would dare say how this track opens and plays out. You know you're in for a journey with the Church. And not to jump ahead, but the album in general really took the Church into more of a psychedelic journey than I was really kind of expecting. To be honest, T-Bone, I'm still kind of processing all the music that this track has to offer. It's a great opening track to maybe check out and see if this album is going to be something you're going to want to check out further or dive into that adventure before it really gets going.
And that takes us up to the second track, C'est la vie.
What if I told you? What if I told you it was true? What if I told
this is actually one of my favorite tracks on the album. Now, thank goodness this song is a vast improvement over that previous track. Strong drumming and outstanding guitar work are the highlights. And here, Kilby sounds fantastic. Also, I felt that the backing vocals worked wonderfully in relation to him.
Yeah, this track is one I'd say is going to capture maybe that classic sound of the church that they're known for, that we know and love. This is a great track from the vocals, the melody, the percussions. I like how Steve goes from singing to almost spoken dialogue at some points, and the guitar riffs that will kind of guide you through the song works beautifully. And let's move on to track number 3, I Think I Knew.
Can you help me to see? Well, okay. Never mind. I think I knew what you wanted.
I really enjoyed this slower tempo song. The use of the acoustic guitar blending with the rest of the music worked very well for me. The lyrics were great, and this track is one that continued to pull me into the album. This is not a long song, but it has kind of so many more layers to it than I was expecting it to be that I actually kind of wish it was a little bit longer.
Yeah, I think you're right. It does. It slows things down, and I think it really works well. The guitar work is exceptional, and Kilby's vocals are an outstanding match. The bass and the drums work in tandem, slow but steady for great effect. Yeah, this actually is a really beautiful track.
Yeah, and let's check out track number 4, Flickering Lights.
Walk on through the darkness. Walk on through the storms. And walk on through the roses and the bricks. And walk on through.
The opening keyboard makes a nice transition from the prior song. I like how Steve's vocals come in with the backing vocals to match his pace. It makes for a beautiful yet haunting melody. I would say that this was a highlight or a standout track, but I'm not sure if it would have the same effect just listening to the song versus listening to it in order of the album where we're at this point.
Yeah, you mentioned that opening piano. It's a great combination of that piano, synths, and bass. It kind of turns this track into something a little bit more mystical. Kilby's vocals work well with the way the music is presented, but at the same time, they seem a little out of place for me. I would probably say that this one is really more of a showcase for the instruments than for the lyrics or the vocals. And that takes us up to the 5th track, the Hypnogogue.
Now I stand empty-handed at the threshold of silence, the end of performance, the end of a life. You won't get something out of mine, make a reservation.
And this title track opens up with some fascinating layering of instruments. Guitars come in, bass is added, synths hover below all that, and then Kilby comes in. Later on, there's a piano line included, and it all makes for an interesting combination that turns this mid-tempo track into something very alluring. And the increase in pace later in the song really works.
Yeah, the soft guitar riff that I feel is maybe kind of a staple sound of the church is coming into the opening of the song really kind of pulled me in. But T-Bone, what really makes this a solid song was that each member of the band I feel is on point and gets to shine. The Hypnogogue is a song you will not soon forget. This song is one that really reminded me of those progressive rock songs from the 70s that you want to listen to with a good pair of headphones and let your mind wander.
Yeah, I think we're going to find that a lot of the songs that are on this album. So that takes us up to the 6th track, Albert Ross.
You were such a good sport. You said, I want this forever. Everyone must want something forever.
This one has a mix of both acoustic and electric guitars. It's a really welcome change for this track as we get to the midpoint of the album. Other than the bass and progression, which are hidden in the background, these two instruments are the core of this melodious song.
Yeah, I really do like that soft acoustic guitar that blends into the melody. That was an outstanding way to open this song. After the depth of the last few songs, how they maybe had so many music layers, I don't want to say this one's more simple, but it was just nice to have a relaxing melody and a chorus. It's not a standout on the album, but I still found it very enjoyable. And moving on to track number 7, Thorn.
And the water said, shout out, on a lake, bathing in the tigers and beautiful. I'm saying it's coming back soon with new improved features on the golden road.
I enjoyed the use of synth on this track. I found it to be a good way to make this track sound unique. But this one, the way the tempo and the vocals changed, I found it to be a bit uneven at points and didn't have the flow of the previous tracks. This one really took me out of the album.
Yeah, I found this one starts off with a little bit more of an experimental sound. You mentioned that keyboard line that is joined in with outstanding bass and slow but steady drumming. The overall pace of this track is mesmerizing, and I really like the guitar that hovers in the background. In addition, the vocals alternate between straightforward and a little bit echoey. I think that could be a little bit jarring on this track. Let's go on to the next track, number 8, Aerodrome.
Running on the spot in the aerodrome, journey so hot, all the way home. I hate feeling this alone. They're gonna fade in.
It has very melodic guitars that open up this song with a nice, rather standard drum beat. But while it doesn't seem like the percussion is noteworthy, it's played so well that I think it fits in perfectly. I also love the backing vocals as the song comes to a close. And Steve, I really like the line in the song, I wish I never said it, I wish I never read it, I wish I never bought it, I wish I never thought it at all.
Like you said, this song does feature some great solid musicianship from the band, and Steve's vocals were on point. But after how long the church has been going around, this is a sound that I've really kind of come to expect from them. That said, this song and the last one probably are my 2 skippable tracks on the album. Let's move on to track number 9, The Coming Days.
Spirit emits a signal, near and far, the beckoning hand, the welcoming land. Fill up all of your days. Fill up all of your days.
The bass line that is throughout this track was a highlight for me. How the rest of the songs form around that bass track, I found it to be a unique listening experience. After the low of the last few songs, this track is what I needed to regain my focus on this album.
Yeah, no question that the musicianship is strong on this track, but for me, this one is one that's starting to grow old pretty fast. The most interesting element for me is the pace builds quite effectively on this song as it progresses. I think this is probably one that you liked a little bit more than I did, but as we're getting later in the album...
I just liked it over those last 2 songs.
Okay,
the bar was a little low.
Yeah. That takes us up to the 10th track, No Other You.
When the spell is broken, then love is awoken. I'm joking, there's no other you. There's no other you.
This one opens up with some exceptional and soulful guitars. The change in vocal tone is a bit harsh, though. I preferred how Kilby's voice started on this track more than how he changed it later on. And the middle of the song has some fine guitar work as well as noteworthy bass and drums.
And T-Bone, this is the track that was the album highlight for me, and it's probably one of my new favorite songs from the church. I enjoyed everything from the guitars to the percussions, the melody, the lyrics, the vocals. This is the one song that will stick with you after that, long after listening to the album. Moving on to track number 11, Succulent.
Who imagined you? The fates and the nerves. The start of a race, thrashing my steed, crashing your curve. Drop me a line up for the cue.
From the unfocused sound that opens the track, it did let you know that this album was going to go back into that psychedelic journey. This song, I will say, is a journey to go on. It's a longer song, but I really like how it kind of keeps building upon itself and makes for a unique listening experience.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is the longest track on the album at almost 7 minutes. The warped guitar that opens this song makes for an interesting effect, but the instruments tend to overwhelm Kilby at times. All too often, what he's singing is incomprehensible, which is a shame, as the overall tone of the song has a way of pulling you in. I really think for this song, maybe even for a number of songs on this album, but especially for this one, it's really a nice showcase for the musicians.
And as we're closing out the album, we're reaching track number 12, Antarctica.
I hear you calling me on through the night. Antarctica. I feel you holding me so cold and white. Antarctica. I feel you watching me and take.
Again, this track features some outstanding use of guitars, percussions, vocals, and just overall solid musicianship. I really liked how the vocals will change throughout the song. You get the feel that Steve is taking you on his trip with him as he's telling you about the journey through his lyrics.
Yeah, this one opens up with that swirling guitars. They build in volume on this track. The tempo of the song completely changes midway through, which I thought was a great way to keep this song interesting. A third change of pace late in the song really creates something different than what we've heard previously on this album.
And let's close out the album with the final track, Second Bridge. This track was unexpected. After what we have heard, the last thing I would expect is a soft ballad that starts out with a beautiful keyboard, then additional instruments come into the song, but it actually works very well in my opinion. The way the band has their vocals harmonizing work for this song, and it's a good way to close out the album.
Yeah, this album closes with a ballad that is highlighted by a bass and, as you mentioned, a piano line. Drums follow. It makes for an agreeable sound, but otherwise, Steve, I have to say I'm ready for this album to end.
Yeah, T-Bone, let's go ahead and sum things up. Overall, I'm going to have to admit that I was not prepared for this album. In fact, it actually took me quite a while to make it through the album in its entirety, as I just kind of would get musically exhausted from what I was hearing on it. And in fact, the first few times I listened to this album for the review, I was musically exhausted. This is one that I would say is maybe for diehard fans of the church. On one hand, I really enjoyed and appreciated the musical journey that the album took me on. But on the other hand, it's a journey that, and especially towards that middle of the album, I started to lose interest in. It reminds me of something that kind of you said when we were doing show prep. Can you name 4 songs by the church? This album, like the church, is full of solid songs, solid musicianships, but is there anything really outstanding or memorable from this album? I'm going to have to say no as a casual fan.
Steve, I wasn't too sure if I was listening to a church album or a Pink Floyd album. A prog concept album can work. I'm just not so sure that it did here. I'll be the first to admit, though, that I'm not a huge church fan. I own a few of their albums, but probably couldn't name a song other than the 3 that we mentioned at the beginning of this review. The musicianship, again, we talk about this pretty regularly on albums. The musicianship here is exceptional. I really don't think that I could say the same about Kilby's vocals, though. They range from good to downright bland. Fans of the band will probably want to pick this one up. I wasn't sold on it, and at 62 minutes in length, it's a long haul. So I can't recommend it, especially for the vast majority of listeners who really only know the church from 1988's Starfish.
Well, T-Bone, I don't know about you, but I kind of need a break after going through that review. So let's jump into some music news. Something that I'm really excited about is Sparks released their first single, The Girl Is Crying in Her Latte.
The girl is crying in her latte, yeah. The girl is crying in her latte, sad. The girl is crying in her latte, wow. The girl is crying in her latte, bad. So many people are crying in their latte.
It's going to be off of the album of the same name on May 26th. That single's out now, and it actually features a great video starring Cate Blanchett.
It's great. Yeah. And then up next, Peter Murphy is joining the Celebrate Bowie tour. This is going to be along with Adrian Belew. This tour has actually been going on for years and years. He's just one of many front members to join in on this celebration. His dates are going to be from April 4th in Houston, Texas to May 8th in Tacoma, Washington.
And speaking of tours, the Violent Femmes announced that they're doing a tour on their 40th anniversary of their self-titled album, which they'll be playing in full every night. That tour kicks off on May 6th in Ventura, California, and concludes on May 21st in Denver, Colorado.
Oh, nice. Well, and of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the Alarm. We seem to talk about them quite a bit. Of course, Mike Peters' health issues, but while he was in the hospital, he was able to, over time, create a new album. It's going to be called Forwards, and it comes out on June 2nd. I think we mentioned this on a previous episode, Steve, that I'm very excited about this one. The last album was maybe a little bit more political than I really enjoyed. And so I get a feeling that this one's going to be a totally different viewpoint. And I think that is going to make it more interesting.
Yeah, already with hearing the first song, I'm already way more interested than I was on their previous effort.
Absolutely. So our next review is going to be for the band Night Crickets.
What are Night Crickets, T-Bone?
Well, let me tell you. So Night Crickets is a collaboration of David J. You'll remember him from Bauhaus with Bela Lugosi's Dead.
Bela Lugosi's dead. The bats have left the bell tower. The victims have been bled. Red velvet lines. The black box. Bela Lugosi's dead.
And Love and Rockets, So Alive.
Feel I'm on the grass again lately, but there's nothing to do with you. I'm
And also Victor De Lorenzo of Violent Femmes, and you'll remember them, of course, from Blister in the Sun.
Let me go on, like I blister in the sun. Let me go on, big hands, I know you're the one.
So this album is called A Free Society. It came out late last year, 2022. This is the first album for this group of musicians, though it looks like we've already found out that they're working on a second album. They got their name from a late friend and collaborator of David J's. He was a sound designer for David Lynch, and when Lynch asked him for sounds of night crickets, the sound designer used day crickets. I didn't know that there was a difference, but Lynch could tell and stated that he wanted his night crickets. Interesting way to put a band's name together.
I'm already intrigued on how this album's going to be.
Right. So on this one, as I mentioned, we have David J. on vocals and bass. Again, he was with Bauhaus and Love and Rockets. Victor De Lorenzo, who does vocals, drums, bass, and keyboards. As I mentioned, Violent Femmes. Then the other regular member of the band is Darwin Meaners, and he is a multi-instrumentalist. Along with them, we have Derek Doss on guitars, Max Meixner on keyboards, Jesse Catalino Montego on alto sax, Janet Schiff on cello and keyboards, Mark Warren does the spoken word vocals on one of the songs, and Steve, we have a special guest on this album.
We do.
We do. Mr. Julian Shaw Taylor, who plays the mellotron. He's been working with David J. for quite some time, and so they put him to work a little bit on this album.
Very nice. Well, let's jump into the album, T-Bone, and see what we think of Night Crickets. The album opens up with the opening track, Black Leather on the Inside.
Valium, Courvoisier, and Rheingold. The ritual is the formula. Black leather on the inside. New York round the corner.
I love how this song starts out with that clapping beat, and you kind of get introduced to each instrument. It really reminded me, as silly as it is, maybe I'm more listening to like a jazz track. You can feel the band is relaxed, and they're letting their talent shine. I love the line, "The devil is on your doorstep because he knows you're staying in." Great way to open the album and a great way to get introduced to Night Crickets.
Yeah, so this one opens up with some, somewhat simple guitar, but the bass and the drums are really the focus. Other instruments start to layer in, but it's those two instruments that really drive this song. By the time the vocals come in midway, the song creates a very unique sound that lets you know where this album is headed.
Moving on to the second track, Candlestick Park.
Feel the breeze off the bay. Say hey. Candlestick Park.
This one gets a bit more electric. The way David J's vocals come in and the use of simple guitars and percussions work very well. Also, you get some strings that come into the melody that work very well. The lyrics are tight and on point. A highly recommended track.
Yeah, the first thing, Steve, that this song reminded me is a sound right out of mid-era Love and Rockets. I think this is probably most likely due to David J's vocals and the guitar work on this song. This tribute to Candlestick Park is not only a view of the days of baseball when it was played there, but also about the time when that field existed. I really like the line in the song, "There's violence in the streets, brothers beaten by police, where Willie and Joe used to play," obviously referring to Willie Mays and Joe DiMaggio. That takes us up to the third track, Amanda's Mantra.
Whoever thought forever would begin in a dream? She's writing words of wisdom, Amanda, for America and the world, Amanda. She's writing words of wisdom.
Now, Steve, this is one of my favorite songs on this album, and it has an interesting history. Originally, Victor wrote it as a tribute to a close friend who'd recently died, but then he heard the poetry of Amanda Gorman during the presidential inauguration. He was so enamored by her words that he altered it as to include sort of a homage to her. This one is sung by Victor and has a totally different sound from the previous tracks. Everything, and I'm including the kitchen sink, is thrown into this song. Spacey keys and the sax are an inspired addition and make this song a treasure. I love the line, "She's writing words of wisdom for America and the world," which is said a number of times during the lyrics.
Yeah, T-Bone, I would agree. This is the album highlight for me as well. I didn't know the history of that song. In fact, my notes kind of say, here we get that goth sound that David J is known for, but it actually was written entirely by Victor.
Right.
This was a highlight track, as I've said before, from the lyrics to Victor's vocals to how the horn mixes into that synth tempo. And also the spoken word of Amanda that's used throughout the track was very effective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely one of the best on the album. It's so well put together. And that leads us up to the fourth track, A Free Society.
Imagine, if you will, a free society where the empty horses can run wild and ad hoc without fear of variance of concern.
Steve, I believe this was the first single on the album.
I think so.
Yeah. Funky bass and a splattering of drums create a great effect with the spoken word read during this track. Steve, I felt like I was in a smoke-filled hip club during the late 50s. Everyone snapping their fingers in approval. As you've mentioned with other artists, Steve, this album so far, track after track, nothing sounds the same as the previous. We're only 4 songs in, and it's making for an uncommon experience.
The title track for me kind of goes back to that jazz vibe, and the crickets get a shine again. From the spoken word dialogues to that bass line to the percussions that guide you throughout the song, I really enjoyed this one as well. And I'm going to say it's probably my second favorite song on the album next to Amanda's Miranda. The use of the organ towards the middle of the song was a nice highlight.
Where the boss and the frail pagans can be at peace in the house of hate.
But also, how many songs can we say have the lyrics, hoo-ha, hoo-ha?
That leads us up to the fifth track, Roman a Clef.
Yeah, I could tell the real story in a Roman clay. Change the names and the faces. Keep those damn lawyers away.
Those great drums and bass return, as well as some different spoken word vocals. There isn't a lot that happens on this track, but strangely enough, it still works. And Steve, I found it oddly hilarious when they added a number of sha-na-nas late in the track, as well as the line, "Keep them lawyers away."
The way the percussions, the guitars, and the bass play off each other to open this track is a nice melody. The near spoken dialogue is a perfect fit. And like you said, I do love that chorus, "Keep the lawyers away." And it's going to be stuck in your head for days after hearing this song. Let's move on to track number 6, Soul Wave.
It's energy, it's vulnerable. It's energy, it's wonderful.
From the soft percussions to the fantastic bass line, this track does a great job of hooking you in from the start. I also like how there's a subtle use of dove or bird sound effects when they hit the line about the doves coming up. Is this a perfect track? No. But does it fit the flow of the album? Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, you hit it right on strong bass again, on how it starts this track. The use of some straightforward keyboards is a nice touch to go along with that, and it really does have a nice steady drum beat.
Let's move on to track number 7, Little Did I.
I know what you do when you go away. I can see it all. Anyway, I tried to talk.
The tempo picks up on this track. The vocals really make this track work for me. And there's also a bit of background vocals that just enhance this enough to move it up to that next level for me.
The fantastic pace of this one reminds me a lot of a Talking Heads type of song. It not only has a great beat, but all the instruments make appearances, both out front and more in the background. I think this one is sung by Victor, and his vocal style fits the song perfectly. This is a really short track at just over 2 minutes. I enjoyed it so much, I wanted it really to go on and on. And that takes us up to the 8th track, Slow Song.
There's nowhere to hide you. There's nowhere to hide. There's nowhere to hide you.
Now, Steve, I'm not really sure why it's spelled S-L-O-E. There must be a reason behind that. But lush synths and guitars open this track, and it sounds like it could have come right out of the 80s. It's another short track. I don't necessarily think it's as good as the previous one, but it does have a very alluring sound. I also did like the brief inclusion of some interesting percussion to close out the song.
Yeah, things slow back down a little bit on this track. And then T-Bone, I'm not sure if I don't think it's David J. or Victor doing the vocals on this one. I could be mistaken, but they sound a little bit different than what we've heard. The highlight for me, though, was that music melody that accompanies throughout this song. It's a short enough track that I would say, it's one that you could easily listen to, not skip or.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. That takes us up to the 9th track, The Unreliable Narrator.
The unreliable narrator gets his intel second hand from disreputable sources, not au fait with the lay of the land. He listens to Chinese whispers.
Now, this one is actually narrated by British actor Mark Warren. It's a spoken word track that examines conspiracy theories and fake news all within a jazzy structure. As with so many songs on this album, the bass and the drums are the focus, and they are fantastic.
Yeah, this song, I'm going to say, gets us back to the strong points that we heard on the first half of the album. Those vocals do a great job of telling you the story of the unreliable narrator, which I love that title. And it also features some great bass and solid percussions by Victor. Moving on to track number 10, Down Below.
Here I go. I'm going down below. Here I go. Down below. Here I go.
I love how this track opens with a dripping sound that flows into some great bass work. The vocals are haunting on this track. The tempo and the pace work very well. This is one that I actually wish would have been a bit longer as well.
Steve, we haven't said this for a long time, but I think you're reading my notes this time. Yeah, I do really like how this song opens with that sound of the water dripping, but also the use of Middle Eastern instruments accompanied by a quick bass line that leads into a driving drum beat. Later in the song, the pace builds up, and it's all just a great combination. Yet again, it's a very short track. I want it to continue and see where it would go.
I can't believe we're already at track number 11, Return to the Garden of Allah.
You got a monkey on your back, and your sacroiliac has developed a crack.
The guitar work that opens this track is solid. The vocals blend very well into this track, and the use of those backing vocals as well make this a highlight on the song. I also love how the vocals flow into that la la la. This makes for a great, easy listen.
You mentioned guitars. It's acoustic guitars and bass that work wonderfully in unison on this track. This one has a great use of words, which often make for an unusual mix. Unfortunately for me, though, this track is the one that I probably found the least interesting on a fascinating album. And that's going to lead us up to the 12th track, Sacred Monster.
UV. Powder. Punchy. Sacred monster.
This one has a great use of bass to create sort of a menacing sound, and a simple piano line only adds to the effect. The breathy vocals work in league with the instruments to create a mesmerizing sound, and the backing vocals that come in late in the song are really a wonderful addition.
From the opening bass line, you know you're in for a great song. The tempo of this song works so well. That bass line, the percussions, the organs, and the vocals blend together so well. This was another album highlight buried deep into towards the end of this album for me. We're going to close things off with the final track, I Want My Night Crickets.
With an exclamation point.
This jam session of a track was a bold but solid way to end the album. It features the percussions that Victor's famous for. Everyone, I feel, gets to shine on this track, from the percussions to the bass, the guitars, and even some great synth work. Also, I like how this track ends with the sound of crickets. I'm assuming those are night crickets. And that was a nice touch to close out the album.
Yeah, we couldn't agree more on this final track. It closes off with some frantic drum playing that leads right into a more steady beat, and probably the most rock guitar that we've heard so far on the album. That, with another great bass line and keyboards, combine to make a hypnotic conclusion. And you're absolutely right, the sound of crickets and the background vocals, and it's truly anything unlike any other track on this album. So, Steve, I didn't know what to expect with this album, to the point that I really did not have very high expectations. This is a perfect example of never judging a book by its cover. Now, keep in mind, this is not radio music. This is an experimental endeavor that brings a collective of talented artists together to create, and create they do. I really like this album. Far more than I thought I would. If you're looking for something a bit more daring than the tired old sounds that are coming out of your radio these days, I would highly recommend this as an option.
Yeah, T-Bone, I really wish I knew of this album before. I think we found out about it early this year of 2023. Wish I knew about it last year. Easily would have been into my top 10.
It's really good.
I found the album to be, for the most part, a very enjoyable listen. It's an album that I would highly recommend if you're a fan of Bauhaus, Love and Rockets, Violent Femmes, or just in the music in general. I think you're really going to enjoy this. Even if you're not a huge fan of those particular bands, I think our listeners will really enjoy this album. So it's a very easy listen to and worth checking out. And I'm excited that Night Crickets appear to be working on a follow-up album, hopefully sometime this year, because I can't wait to jump back into the music of the Night Crickets.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And Steve, like I mentioned, it's a little bit more experimental. It's a little bit more daring. I don't know that it's going to appeal to everybody, and that's fine. But I think if you are willing to move out of your comfort zone a little bit, that you're going to find that there's a lot of really great, interesting music on this album.
Yeah. And one thing this album really has going for it is each track sounds unique and different.
Absolutely.
So even if you don't like one style, it's going to change in a minute to 2 to 3 minutes. Out of the two albums we did today, The Church and Night Crickets, highly recommend Night Crickets.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. The Church was not exactly what I was hoping for. But Night Crickets, a band that nobody, I'm sure, has ever even heard of, is the one to go with.
All right, T-Bone. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the New Wave Music Podcast. Looking ahead to our next episode, we're actually going to jump in more towards the goth or dark wave. We're going to go with the latest from Clan of Zymox. And Susie from Susie and the Banshees, she's touring a lot this festivals this upcoming summer. So to get us prepped for that, she's reissued her 2007 solo album, and we're going to be taking a listen to that reissue.
Yeah, it's called Mandalay. And we want to thank you for listening. Of course, you can always find us on your different social medias, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Just look up New Wave Music Podcast. And always, send us an email. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know what albums you might be interested in us reviewing. You can do that at newwavemusicpodcast@yahoo.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.